I'm Holly Mackey, and we're so happy you could be with us today. We have two wonderful, wonderful scholars with us today, who are both Jackson Scholar and mentors. And I just wanted to say that we're now into our webinars after several months. And this one is one that came as a request from scholars and from some newly established faculty. So we're establishing the contours of your research agenda. And this is one of those topics that can be very challenging because it's somewhat vague, and people tell you to be able to have your 3-minute elevator speech or to be able to articulate it quickly, but no one really tells you how to do it necessarily. And some of us never figure it out, and we just ramble on. In my case, and some people can do it really well, just inherently. So what we've done is we paired a senior scholar with a younger junior faculty member who both do this well, and we've asked them to speak with you today. So we have Dr. Irene Yoon at University of Utah, and we have Dr. Nakia Gray-Nicolas at Queens College, who will be talking with you about this today. And they have a presentation that they have put together for you, and then at the end, we'll be able to take questions. So on the side of your screen, you'll have the comment box. You can type questions in there, and Danny or Marcy will be facilitating questions at the end. So as you think of things, go ahead and type them in, and then we'll get to all of those at the end. And any questions that we don't have time for, we can follow up via email if we wanted to do that. And for people who cannot be here live, or if you have to leave for some reason, we do post these up on the UCEA website. So under the resources, you can click on webinars, and you can go and watch any of the previous webinars, or you can go ahead and rewatch this one again too. So with that, I will turn it over to Drs. Yoon and Gray-Nicolas.
Hello. I think I'm up first, right? So, hi, I'm Nakia Gray-Nicolas. I'm at Queens College in the CUNY system. I just finished my first year on the tenure track, so I'm going into my second year. I was a Jackson Scholar. Yay! And, sometime before. Everything blurs after a while, but I believe it was 2014 to 2016. So I finished up my dissertation, defended my dissertation in June of 2017. And while doing so, I was a lecturer, and I was a lecturer for the year following before I landed a tenure track position. So just a little bit about me. I'll go into my story about how I developed my research agenda, and the minds I picked along the way. So we can go to the next slide. I think I have my slides in the wrong order though, Irene. If you can speak to the one that says choosing my research topics, I'll do that one first.
Oh, whoops.
Okay, so I'll just let the slide come up first.
Is it not up?
No, I'm still seeing the welcome slide.
Oh, because I had switched to, let me make sure my share, it says, oh, you know why? Because it says paused.
Yeah.
So, how does that look?
I still see welcome screen. More behind the scene things for those of you that are logged on with us. Just bear with us 1 second. Oh, perfect. Okay, so this is my flow chart of how I came to my research topics, particularly that of my dissertation. Seeing that I am a junior scholar, and what I am now crafting as research topics going forward. So I want to start in the center where it says experiences and identity, because for me, it was really my experiences growing up and my identity, those placed on me and those I placed on myself, that led me to my specific research topics. So if you go to the boxes right above and right below experiences identity, you see that I was a first generation college and graduate student. We grew up rather poor, and I'm Black and I'm woman, right? So those are some of the identities placed on me, or that I kind of fit into. And if you look below, those are some of the positions I held, again, experiences and identities. So I worked in nonprofit. I while working on my master's in English education and special education, I worked in nonprofit as an after-school provider, first for the program for those students who were labeled for some reason, and then I kind of moved up to the director of youth services. Then I was an English teacher for a while, and after that, I was a higher education administrator. I was actually the director of a pre-college program, and I'm currently assistant professor. So as these very many identities and experiences has shaped me, I decided to go for my doctorate. And while thinking through what I was going to do in graduate school and how I was going to do it, I couldn't help think about my experiences growing up and the experiences I had as a pre-college program director. So as I mentioned before, I was first generation college student. I actually moved cross country in the middle of high school. So I lived in LA and then I moved to lived in LA and then I moved back to Brooklyn. I'm originally from Brooklyn. And I had to navigate what it meant to be a high school student in those spaces and what it meant to want to go to college and what it meant to be a Black girl at the time and the kind of restrictions placed on me as a Black girl. So when I was applying to different colleges, I was kind of I was pushed into applying to certain spaces and not other spaces. If I told my advisor, my college counselor at the time, that I wanted to apply to, say, an Ivy League, she said, no, you should apply to this school or that school. Thankfully, I had influences from others and did decide to apply to Ivy Leagues and other private institutions in addition to state colleges. But that experience, navigating the college experience, really helped to shape my research agenda. So fast forward however many years, I became a director for pre-college transition program. And in that program, in visiting high schools and talking to counselors about the fact that my program provided developmental courses and college credit courses to students, I was blown away by some of the responses. One counselor in particular told me out of a possible 200 students, she can only think of one student who would qualify for my program. So it got me thinking even more about college access and college choice and being college ready and what capital is being employed and what capital is privileged in these high school spaces. So my dissertation research and my research all throughout my doctorate program really centered and focused on college readiness, college choice, college access, and capital. Particularly, I looked at, my framework was Bordeaux's capital, economic, social, and cultural capital. So you'll see those above highlighted. And it kind of evolved as I did my research. I was in 3 high school spaces, and I chose 3 because I wanted to see the different dynamics of high schools. School leaders were approaching what it meant to be college ready for their students and what they were doing to ensure that their students had a choice and had access to college. And when I say access, I don't mean, yeah, you're going or you're not going. I mean the different levels of access, right? Are you being pushed towards just community school? Are you being pushed towards other types of spaces just because of who you are, just because of the identity placed on you? So throughout my research, if you go now below, you see highlighted again, community engagement, distributed leadership, and pre-college transition programs. So those are some of the things that came and popped up throughout my research and became a part of my research agenda. The boxes on the perimeter of this flow chart hints at some of the work I'm currently doing or want to do. So you'll see things in italic. Those are things that I want to do, or eventually want to explore as it relates to my primary research topics, or maybe not relating to my primary research topics. So this is kind of a coming of age for me and how I got to the topics that I arrived to. Okay. I'll give it a second and then we'll go back one slide. So these are my current research topics. So as I mentioned, college readiness and access, community engagement, and distributed leadership. And then this other category really kind of speaks to some of the other things I've done in my doctorate program and currently in terms of my research and my prospective publications. If we go first to college readiness, you see that from there in that box, my dissertation came out of that. Also a book chapter that's coming out a little bit later this year. That's coming out. I recently submitted resubmitted. I had a revise and resubmit for the Journal for School Leadership, and that's based on college readiness and access. And I currently have a grant funded program project that I'm starting up next month in terms of my data collection and hoping for a couple of pubs from that as well. And then as you just go around this circle, you see some of the other things that are coming from these research topics that I have. But I really just want to hone in on other, because your dissertation research doesn't have to define you for the rest of your academic career. When I was in graduate school, I was constantly referred to as the P20 person, and I didn't mind, but I did take some, I minded, but I didn't mind. My fear was I would be kind of pigeonholed to the research I did in my graduate program, and I didn't want to be. I wanted the opportunity and the flexibility to be more than that identity that I placed on myself and others placed on me, to kind of go back to my experiences and identity. So some of the things I'm currently doing, and I've done in my graduate program, I worked on pieces around knowledge broker organizations, so that's KBO, and their influence on the media and subsequently their influence on education. And then intersectionality. So as a Black woman and as a Black woman pre-tenured faculty member, there is a lot that kind of goes into that identity and what that means to fit those different identity markers. So I am doing some research around that, some self-ethnography, but also just talking to other Black women about that. So everything around has either become publications or publications in the works, or they are presentations that were recently accepted to UCA and hoping for acceptance to ARA as well. So that's me, and I think I got it in time, somewhat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nakia. I'm sorry that I didn't realize the presentation was paused at the beginning, but now I'm with you. So, hi, I'm Irene Yoon. I am an assistant professor at the University of Utah. And I am also going to tell you a little bit about sort of how I came to what my trajectory has been, primarily through the organizations that I've been involved in. I just first though wanted to say hi to everyone out there. I think we've got a couple new attendees, and I'm really excited to see you guys on there. So I think you're all muted. You've all muted yourself, but you could say hi out loud anyway. So my trajectory as an educator started very young. I knew from the time, there's always these kind of rare, strange people who just know what they want to do when they're very small. And that was me. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I knew that I was a reader and a writer. And so all through college, I went to Williams College, which didn't have a teacher education program. But I sought out a lot of internships during the school year and then summer jobs. And you can hear my dog whining a little bit in the background. I have a disability, I have chronic illnesses. And so I was actually officially diagnosed with those in college and had to take medical leave. And so I decided, with my health, that teaching probably wasn't something I could physically do right after college. And I decided to then work in education policy nonprofits. And I always thought I would go back to get my master's in teaching and go into the classroom, but I got exposed to a lot of district and state level partnerships and building demonstration projects for like teacher professional learning and induction programs. And so after college, I ended up with an internship at the U.S. Department of Education in the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Ed, and I worked specifically on their innovative teacher ed programs. And then I ended up with a job at a nonprofit called the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future. And through being their partnerships coordinator, I started to get a sense of universities that were engaging with communities and schools. And I wanted to make sure that when I went to grad school, which was something that I had always been interested in, I wanted to make sure that I went to grad school at a place where I could be doing research alongside practitioners and that I would be embedded in classrooms. And so I decided to go to the University of Washington, where I was well supported by my advisor, who's now retired, Mike Knapp. And I had a research assistantship with Chrisanne Galucci, and they really influenced me in terms of like my love for qualitative research and for really just working in these like long-term research programs with practitioners. So like, for example, I still talk to and am in touch with some of the research participants from when I was a doc student RA. So it's where I started. The University of Washington is where, and NICTAP is where I started to learn that like a lot happens through really long-term, in-depth collaborations and relationships, and that it takes a lot of being an authentic human being in order to be a good researcher. And so what I've shown here is just some of the people who, you know, thus far, who I've mentioned have made sort of programs and people who've made a difference in some of how I think about things and how they were really supportive of me. UW was great also because I had my committee members and I also had informal mentors who were not on my committee, but they were involved in sort of part of my training, either as a teacher, as a researcher, as, you know, getting me networked into professional communities. And a lot of my informal networking and mentoring actually happened to UCA Jackson Scholars, and it still does now. So the people who were Jackson mentors when I was a Jackson Scholar are still my mentors now. So that's people like Monica Bern Jimenez, who at the time was an associate professor, and she was, you know, she wasn't director of UCEA or on the executive committee or anything like that, but she was just another Jackson mentor. I met Gerardo Lopez that way, and I met Andrea Rohr that way. And as I was applying out for faculty tenure track jobs, this has to sort of do with the contours of my research agenda. It was difficult for me to find a tenure track job. It took me 3 job cycles. And in the meantime, I worked at the University of Utah at the Utah Education Policy Center doing school improvement support team work with Andrea Rohr and Corey Groff. And they really introduced me and have sort of absorbed me into the network of Utah schools and school districts and people at the State Office of Education in Utah. And so, you know, through working with them, I thought I would be in Utah for a year or 2, but when a tenure track position came up here at Utah, it was just one of the places that I applied, and I ended up being offered a position here, luckily. And so I've been able to use some of the relationships that I started to build and the introductions that I got at the UEPC in my teaching and in my research activities here in the department. So I've had sort of an unusual career in that, like, I was able to sort of start getting to know some people in a new place before I actually started the tenure track position and before I started the research agenda here. But again, like, I can't emphasize enough that the first 2 years or so of any kind of job, especially if you're moving from, into a new geographic region or institution, is really going to be building relationships, and you're going to be just getting to know people in school districts and in schools and community organizations, and just you're not necessarily going to jump right in with like getting a grant and an IRB from your first day. A lot of it is you have to meet people and find out what good things are already happening on the ground. So a little bit about my research projects. So like I said, at FIPSI and NCTAF, I started to work in teacher education, induction, and working conditions, if you start at the top. And I don't know, like, if you checked or Googled my Google Scholar page, you would see that there are some reports from that time of my career on Brown v. Board, and looking at how there were still inequities. It was the 50th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education at the time, and there were still inequities on the teaching system. There's a report on building induction systems for teachers, and there's a report on teachers using learning in like online network communities, and there's a cost of teacher turnover project. So those were like reports that were trying to connect demonstration projects to state policy. And I really enjoyed those, but I really wanted to get involved with instruction and understanding teaching a little bit better. And so when I went to the University of Washington again, I was seeking out graduate programs where I could work on research teams that were embedded in schools and that were partnering with practitioners. And so I was part of a big sort of long-term study, not a big one, but a long-term study with the Center for Educational Leadership to study their instructional improvement and district-wide reform partnerships. And we used lenses of professional learning, sociocultural learning, to look at some of the development of instructional coaching and the spreading of reform practices. And so I got to spend a whole lot of time in classrooms and professional development sessions and with instructional coaches and in coaching sessions, as well as like meetings among coaches in a district office. And as I was hanging out with them, I realized they're all sort of like dancing around a lot of equity issues with serving kids of color. And it was starting to bother me because the teaching force in those districts, just like in the country at large, were like really heavily middle-class white women. And I was having experiences where like white women teachers were sort of asking me questions or talking about their practice or talking about their students to me in ways that really mattered to how they saw themselves as teachers and how they engaged in things like professional learning communities. And it really bothered me that like there wasn't really talk of who students were or of who the teachers were. So for my dissertation, I thought, okay, let me take this stuff that I've learned about professional learning and teacher collaboration and looking at teachers' practice as embedded in these like organizational cultures. And I decided to take specific lenses on whiteness among middle-class white women teachers who worked in really racially diverse elementary schools, and sort of examining the ways that whiteness got constructed in the professional cultures in those classrooms and school teams. So I did a pilot study through a qualitative research course, and that one turned into a publication years later. like after I graduated. And then I also did my dissertation on how, like the construction of middle-class white womanhood and teaching and teacher collaboration, specifically looking at like the stories that teachers tell about kids and parents, looking at the ways that conversations unfold, like one person at a time, how they add on to each other's ideas and notions about their students and about what it means to be a white woman teacher. Yeah, so when I was on the job market and I was going around just talking about the construction of whiteness and middle-class white womanhood as part of teachers' professional learning and professional socialization, and looking at organizational cultures as, you know, constructing or like constitutive of whiteness, it wasn't always easy to figure out how I would fit in or describe my research agenda on the job market. I was told, I remember from one person, I was getting some feedback on an application that I never heard anything about. And she said, your research agenda sounds amazing. And like, it would be great for our students. And then she said, and that's all I'm going to say. So I think there was something about the, you know, the department culture where, you know, at that particular institution, they weren't going to really delve into whiteness. So I started to be really selective about where I applied for jobs. And I started to talk about not only the whiteness aspects, but also as my contributions being an ability to integrate critical theories with professional learning, that, you know, looking at the construction and teacher stories that are told during professional collaboration as are part of instructional leadership and instructional concerns, and how they had implications for how leaders would facilitate conversations that start out with equity intentions. So I started to learn a little bit more about how to talk about my work in ways that got maybe a little more interesting for people who might have been more intimidated by the term whiteness or the idea of whiteness. Also, because of working at the UEPC, I was working on school improvement and supporting school teams, specifically in mostly racially diverse schools that were going through accountability mandated turnaround. And that topic itself was a little bit more accessible or tangible to people. And so that area of expertise seemed, I guess, something that was seen as something that was valuable. And so I started to get a few more hits when I had a little bit more UEPC experience under my belt. As I start to talk about the projects that have developed over the past 6 years on a tenure track, I want to point out that these last 4 sort of topic areas all hang together, because the way that I talk about my research agenda now is that I am a scholar who cares about humanizing school cultures or organizational cultures that create conditions for transformation. So there's still some systems change and school improvement in there, but it's really also opening up my ability to talk about my critical lens and like who it is that I'm really concerned about, or what it is that I'm really concerned about. So you can see that some of the things still track. And as I talk about the sort of continuing topic areas of my research agenda, I'll be able to show connections back to my NICTAF days, my research, my RA-ship days at looking at instructional improvement, my school improvement work at UEPC. You'll see all of these things start to come, like they continue to show up and circle back. And so that I can now talk about my research in a sort of single phrase. So even though I've had really different experiences, they always sort of have threads from something that I had done before. So when I started my tenure track job, I had sort of two things going on at the same time. I was trying to publish for my dissertation, and I was also starting to analyze data that had been collected, that we had collected at the UAPC during all of our turnaround work. And so what you look at on the slide is that the dates of the publications from my dissertation are really spread out. These pieces, the empirical work had to go through a lot of rejections. So what would happen was I would get like 3 glowing reviews and the editor would reject. Part of that is just the politics of journals getting so many submissions. I think part of it is, you know, I submitted to journals at unlucky times when there was turnover in editor, like change in editorships. But each of those dissertation pieces took about 3 years to get published. And it wasn't because I got bad reviews or because they weren't quality work, but because publishing, especially in sort of critical research where you're intentionally talking about things in a tricky way, where you're saying I'm intentionally talking about multiple dimensions of middle-class white women teachers' identities, and I'm intentionally talking about teachers who are reconstructing whiteness together, even though they're meeting for an equity purpose and even though they have an equity agenda themselves. Like, those are complex issues that I think are hard to talk about and that don't have a fix or don't have so I think figuring out how to communicate really the purpose of my studies, if it's not necessarily to tear people down, or if it's not necessarily only to provide a critical perspective, but also to provide implications, if it's to look at multiple layers of a problem, as opposed to like the more traditional approach where people are talking about just demonstrating a single slice of a problem, sort of tackling all of those multidimensional aspects is really important to me in my research, but it's also, I think, hard to do. And I think that I've gotten better at exploring, at stating my purpose for each piece, but I also think that there have been aspects where journals have been hesitant to publish some of these pieces. And I can tell you that everything else I've put out there has gotten much, has moved through pipelines much more quickly. So whiteness, man, it just gets people. So the ways that I was looking at our turnaround data was really to think about, okay, I really care about leaders and building school cultures and professional cultures. So, and the reasons why I believe in or am interested in these things are because I want to see schools providing really ambitious, equitable instruction. I want to see kids of color and disabled children and queer kids and all of the possible dimensions of traditionally being marginalized. I want to see those being attended to in a school. And I'm interested in how leaders and school cultures are part of either achieving those things or transforming into school cultures that can support kids in these ways. So the ways that I've looked at turnaround leadership is to say, okay, turnaround is often talked about in this like sort of more technical way where there are stages of change, and there's like stages of school improvement planning, and there's different strategies that leaders should be using. And the ways that I've been trying to talk about it instead are to look at what's the culture in the schools and what are the experiences of the leaders. and how are they really like emotionally loaded, and how are they really cognitively complex. So this work in turnaround leadership is where I started to analyze data at the beginning of my tenure track position, and I've also been able to bring doc students and take them as research assistants and co-authors. And so we've been analyzing the data together and writing the papers together, presenting them together, and so and publishing them together. So in this area is where you'll see, like, I took on some of that role where researcher overlaps with being a mentor. And also in this area, you'll see I put that LIFT statewide contract, which means LIFT is a statewide turnaround leadership support program. And with the UAPC, I was part of writing and winning a 5-year contract to develop the program and offer it statewide. And so the ways that the approaches that we've taken have really been about like shedding deficit perspectives of turnaround leaders, creating environments where they can be vulnerable with each other, where they can bring their school teams and have like dedicated sort of distraction-free space to build what they want, to try to create space for them to have vision and to feel supported and valued, based on a lot of research that we know with turnaround leaders, often in turnaround schools, educators feeling sort of beat down and looked down upon. So that's one area of my work. And that sort of connects directly back to my UEPC days, as well as my instructional improvement days. And you can, and it also sort of, it's definitely influenced by my ways of thinking about professional collaboration.
Irene,
sort of,
I'm sorry, just cut in one quick sec. We have about 22 minutes left. Did you want to transition to Q&A soon? Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. So one thing that I wanted to point out is that as I've developed new projects on looking at race and disability in special education inclusion, specifically through haunting and transgenerational traumas, and I've written more about qualitative research. I'm trying to, I've continued to embrace this idea of authentic relationships in my research agenda, and I'm starting to get much more explicit about the fact that, like, I am talking about not only one dimension of identity, I am talking about leadership and organizational cultures as, you know, important for instruction, for academics, and for treating students as human beings. And that I'm trying to embrace and pursue like love and freedom dreams throughout my research, both in the way that I do research and also in what I write about. So you'll see that sort of as a theme that comes out more in my research. And those definitely stem from my experiences with my dissertation on middle-class white womanhood. If you go to Twitter and look up #ShadowCV, you will see that I've got all this like successful stuff with funding and publications, but there's way more in the ShadowCV in terms of rejections. And I just wanted to point out that there's way more rejection than there is success. And especially if you're doing critical research, you have to make sure it's really good, but you also have to just continue to believe in it, even if it's like the 4th time you're sending something out for review. Just to, it's a reality. It's got to be really good, and you have to believe in it, and you have to love it, and just keep putting it out there. and keep getting feedback from people. Okay. Nakia, thanks for watching our time so well. Would you like to just go to Q&A directly, or do you want us to talk to each other first for a little while?
I think we can do like a combination of both, right? Go to Q&A, and then if there are questions that we have for each other, if we don't get many questions in Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. The questions might actually become a good conversation between you guys. So if you want, I'll start with the first one. How do you help, or if someone asks for help in narrowing their focus in their research, they want to be impactful, they want to be effective, but they seem to have too many interests right now. What would you say to them?
If you don't mind, I'll go first. So that's kind of me, right? I have a lot of interest, and in talking to mentors and colleagues alike, it was kind of, and even when I taught research method, I always say, so what? Okay, what's the point? What will change? And how will it change, right? So you wanna make sure, to Irene's point, you wanna make sure that your work is impactful, and it speaks to who you are, but you don't want your message to be lost. So you have to think about that when you have too many things going on, too many things on your plate, too many ideas. So the drilling down takes time. It's not something you're gonna say, oh, I have 20 ideas and tomorrow I have 5. It's sometimes trial and error. So before I even entered my doc program, someone told me, have some ideas in mind of what you want to study, and then test them out in your classes. Whenever you have a project to do, test it out, see what comes from that. Always try to gear what you're doing towards your interests, and from there it'll be kind of flushed out. So that was my experience in grad school, having a class and saying, okay, let me do a pilot study on this, let me do a lit review on this, let me do a historical analysis on this, and are these still things I'm interested in? Definitely my candidacy helped to narrow things down. But beyond that, going forward past candidacy, it was my proposal and taking a proposal class and talking with other students and going from there. So be patient with yourself, test things out, and always ask yourself, so what's the point? What will change? What will cause a ripple? You know, you're not always going to see a humongous change, but you might, you know, a little ripple in the sea. It kind of goes and goes and goes, and eventually you'll see change.
I'd say also that when I was a student and also working on my dissertation, I used to worry that like everything had to be in my dissertation, and that I used to worry that like I wouldn't know what to do after. What I found is that you probably have way more interests than you're able to approach in one project, and you're going to keep getting opportunities to explore those, like way more than you can say yes to. There's always going to be things happening on the ground with practitioners and community organizations. There's always going to be new statewide initiatives that come up. There's always going to be stuff that people are going to be asking you to, you know, if you're interested in doing a part of on a bigger project. So there's going to be a lot of ways to pursue your interests. But what I would look for is, and this was like what was hardest for me to kind of figure out over the years, like I've covered a lot of topics and used a lot of frameworks in my work, but I really have a core concern, and that is whether or not schools are humanizing learning environments for students of color and students with disabilities and other marginalized students, especially with interest, looking at them, looking at students as complex people with intersecting and multidimensional identities. And so if I can figure out that that's my core concern, and that the core value for me as a scholar is to be doing things with like long-term authentic relationships where, like, you know, I am colleagues and friends with my research partners. then if I have that core concern and then the core sort of value for how I go about my work, then those things can sort of drive how I pick and choose what to do. So even if they're different, they still will hang together on something.
The next question I have is about what I'm going to call the advisor effect, where you work so much with an advisor that you kind of move away from your own research interests. So how would you recommend someone like reset their agenda without losing some of that momentum?
I can speak to this a little bit. My advisor did research that was much more in the sort of instructional improvement, sociocultural theory, like district-wide improvement kind of area. And he was very supportive of the fact that like my dissertation would look different from what my research assistantship work was. And so I think if you can find a chair where you can negotiate that kind of relationship where it's like you obviously care about the thing that you're working on with your RA-ship and you're going to learn as much as you can from it, but for your own dissertation, you're going to do something different. That's one option. Another option is it depends on how much time you have. If you are trying to get out in 4 years, then it might just be most efficient to do your dissertation topic on something that your chair suggests you do or already has data for you to use, depending on your personal and professional life. So I think if there's a way for you and your chair to negotiate, a way for you to work with them on things that are obviously important to you, but won't be your dissertation, that's great. Another thing you could potentially do is use data from their project, but analyze it with a different perspective and with different research questions. So if you're, like for me, the data I collected on those teacher teams talking to each other could have been used for a study on any kind of instructional improvement or professional learning or study of teacher collaboration. But I instead used specific frameworks and lenses to look at them in terms of whiteness. So it didn't have to be a critical study. So you could also see if your advisor has you on a research project that has a data set that you could use and analyze from a different framework, then maybe that would work as well.
Just to add to that, your chair and your advisor doesn't have to be the same person. So in addition to testing out and narrowing down your focus, you test out the faculty in your department throughout your time there before you select a chair for your dissertation. So getting to know those in your department and being honest with yourself and with them what your research is about. My chair pushed me to do a mixed method study. I thought I was a qualitative researcher, and he really pushed for the quantitative piece. And I very much appreciate that. I was very resistant to it at first, but in talking with him, it made sense. And it definitely strengthened my dissertation. And it gave me experience working with that methodology, and in turn made me a better researcher. I think more marketable in the long run.
I have a question for you. During your doctoral preparation in your programs, who did you consult, or how did you learn how to make your scholarly work legible to varying departments or academic disciplines?
One of the things I did was my committee included people from different departments. So I had someone from political science who was a political theorist about race and race and democracy in the US. I had an educational historian who studied student activism and Black student activism on campuses, and a scholar from English who studied whiteness in literature, and then my chair who did instructional improvement and qualitative research. So I think talking with each of them and getting
I think we lost Dr. Yoon.
So hopefully she'll be able to sign in.
Right.
Yeah, we still have a few minutes, so we'll wait for her. We apologize for that. Dr. Gray-Nicolas, did you want to add something to that question? Oh, hi, glad you're back.
We can't hear you. We
Yeah,
can't hear
Dr.
you.
Yoon, we can't hear you. Yeah, check your audio, make sure you're not muted. On the control
Oh,
panel.
your mic's not on at all. It's not showing up.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Gray-Nicolas, did you want to add something while we try to sort out the audio?
I mean, definitely echoing a lot of what Dr. Ian said in terms of making sure that your committee really speaks to your research, but having conversations with those potential committee members early on. I had folks from ed leadership, but also higher ed, since my topic really straddles the two, but sometimes doesn't fit into either. So I definitely made it a point to talk to a lot of folks in ed leadership and in higher ed, and folks who centered student voices in their research, because I really wanted students' voices to be highlighted. And then I think the second, I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure if you meant to departments within your current institution or outside, for example, being on the job market. So I hope that answers that question.
So can you talk a little bit about your writing routine? Like, do you create space for your writing? Do you set something on a calendar? How do you attack that?
So I try to write every day, and I try to have a set time, but I also have a 14-month-old. So lately it's been writing after he goes to bed, which kind of resembled how I wrote in my doc program, because I worked full time. So it was like work full time, go to class, come home late at night, write. And I wanted to get away from that. But it being summer, me being home most of the time, it's writing late at night. So I do have the goal to write every day, and I kind of try to check that off and try to do as much writing every day as possible. When I did my dissertation, I did write every day. I made it a point to park myself, whether it be a Starbucks or on campus. Like I said, I was working as a lecturer at the time, and I made it a point to write every day. And I checked in, even if no one saw it but myself. I posted a picture on Instagram every single day of me writing as an accountability tool. Now I have accountability partners.
Great accountability, yeah.
And we try to ensure that we check in with each other every other week to say, well, how did the writing go? Are you writing? So on and so forth. I don't want to admit this, but a lot of times I'm deadline driven. So if I have a deadline, I do a lot more writing, and I'm a lot more productive. So I've been trying to build in internal deadlines to trick my procrastination into writing as much as possible. But when I'm in the office, when I go into the office, the first thing I do is write. I set a timer and I write. And I developed that habit by the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. They have writing challenges, and that's how I developed that habit of, like, the first thing I do when I come into the office, I come in, I close my door, I set my timer, and I write. So that definitely helps when I'm on campus. Off campus, like I said, it turns out to be a nightly thing, but I'm still getting writing done.
It's amazing. I'm structured, but I'm not as structured as that. I stack my meetings and teaching on 2 to 3 days a week, and I take 2 days for writing. And I try to make sure that at least like an hour to 2 of that is actually outlining or writing things. And the rest of the time I can use for reading or taking notes on things or drawing out a figure for my framework or whatever it is that I need to do, analyze data, whatever. So, and I also end up probably dipping in and out and doing some of those things for different projects. So like for one project, I might need to read. For another project, I might need to analyze some data. For something that's really close to, I just might need to spend 4 hours and push it out the door. So I try to, and I've gotten better and better at making sure that those writing days are guarded and protected. And I have also learned not to make Fridays my writing days, because by Fridays I'm pooped and I have no energy or motivation. And that Fridays are a much better time for me to like mess around with like my lesson plans for the next week, or grade some student papers, or things that don't necessarily require me to be creative. So my writing days are earlier in the week when I've had a little time to rest over the weekend and I have some energy.
I just want to add that writing includes reading and data analysis. I always thought writing had to be putting words to paper. So by shifting what I believe is writing, or not I believe, but what constitutes writing, you know, it helps to say, okay, well, I read this article, or I annotated this article, or I, you know, analyzed that data, and I got writing done for the day. So that really helps.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, I think we could squeeze in one more question, and then we'll answer a couple more via email. I will follow up via email, because we do have a lot of great questions. So here it is. How did you go about selecting the order of how you developed and scaffolded work, the actual research processes, and distributing your scholarship within your research agenda? How did you go about selecting the order and how that was developed?
You can go.
Okay. Selecting order. I mean, right now, because I'm very junior, a lot, I'm still thinking through my dissertation research and pulling from there what I can in terms of research beyond that in publication. So as I mentioned, I did get a small grant for a project, but that's definitely work that is based from my research regarding my dissertation and those research topics. So in terms of scaffolding the work and the distribution, so if I am reading the question correctly, in being a newly, you know, tenure track person, I had to do like a 5-year plan. So I kind of broke down in that 5 years what I want to look at, what I want to research, what I want to send out, where I might want to send it out. How does my research and my teaching and my service align? How does my startup funds, my research funds align with the research that I'm doing? So taking kind of my 4 main topics, and from there, the work I've already done and the work I want to do, how does that fit into these topics, and what should I be doing in terms of next step, whether it's something theoretical or something empirical, and do I have time? Can I fit it in given my other constraints here on the job, for example, teaching and service. And then in terms of distribution, I have some folks that are in the same boat as me, so they're 1st or 2nd year tenure track scholars. Talking with them and talking through the journals that are reflective of our field and reflective of our research agendas and kind of where they stand, and thinking through what can we send to different places and spaces, and that has really helped. I have one such accountability partner, and then talking with her and reviewing the journals that are out there, that has helped us both to kind of say, okay, how are we going to fit what we're currently working on in these spaces, and how can we make these spaces fit what we're currently working on?
I would say something similar where, you know, the first couple years, if you're looking at a tenure track job, are going to be publishing from your dissertation. After that, you'll probably have access to, or like if you're quantitative, you'll probably have access to data sets. You may also have that if you're qualitative, or you will have started to collect new data. Or if not, like if you're at a teaching institution and you haven't had time to go out and collect new data, then you can go back to your dissertation data and analyze and write about data you didn't get to include in your dissertation because there was probably too much of it. And so, you know, while you are trying to turn your dissertation into publications, you're also sort of building relationships on the ground, and then sort of looking around for where there's either existing data or ways that you can go back to your dissertation data set and analyze things that you couldn't address before. So you'll see that, like, depending on different journals or different pieces, however long they take, you could be writing off your dissertation for quite a long time. And that's just realistic, although people will want to see by about year 3 that you're starting to venture into like a new research project. So, a lot of it happens by happenstance. I was trying to publish for my dissertation at the same time that I happened to have this data from the policy center work previously that I decided to start analyzing. Because when I was actively doing school improvement support, I didn't have any time for research. And so then after about 4 years of that, I started to get really sort of burned out on schools that were really kind of not doing well by children that I identify with. And so I decided, all right, the reasons why I embarked on a lot of my critical research, I need to see schools where people are trying to do something different and do something better. And so that's where my most recent research has gone. So it's not a different topic, it's just looking at a different side of it. So it sort of evolves based on who you are, what you have access to, and what kind of work is going on around you.
Thank you for answering those questions. I promise that the couple of questions that are pending, we will follow up via email and we'll send those out to you. I do have a few reminders before we end. In August, we have another wonderful webinar. This one's called Preaching It, Practical Advice to Start Your Semester Right with Dr. Judy Alston. Of course, UCEA convention is happening. It's almost time. November 20th through the 24th in New Orleans. Registration is open. All the information you need can be found on the UCEA website. I also want to thank Dr. Yoon, of course, and Dr. Gray-Nicolas for taking their time out of a very busy schedule to be with us today. We appreciate the experiences that you're sharing with us. Dr. Holly Mackey, again, she put together a wonderful webinar that the graduate student community within UCA can learn from and enjoy. Thank you for that. This webinar will be archived on the UCA website under resources if you want to share it with some friends or if you want to refer back to it. Everyone, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, Irene. Thank you.
Bye, Nakia. It's great to see you.